What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Glad to see everyone back. I took a break last week and didn't have my live stream, but I'm back strong this week, and I'll be doing live streams every Tuesday going forward. And I'll be sure to give you guys a notice next time. Kind of snuck up on me the last week, and I was on vacation, so hopefully going forward, I'll be very consistent with it. But it's good to see everyone over here in the chat. And just wanted to give a call out to anyone who is watching one of my videos for the first time. This is my live stream format, and these videos are a lot longer and a lot more in-depth about different fishing strategies, techniques, or actually breaking down lake maps for my subscribers and Patreon members. And so because these videos are so long, maybe a little bit difficult to take it all in if you're new to fishing or you're just new to my channel. So go check out my channel down below. You can go onto my channel page and check out some of my normal videos. They're normally between 7 and 15 minutes long, a lot easier to digest, and normally they're a really good introduction to my channel, and then you can come back and watch these live stream videos after you've seen a few of my videos. So other than that, for all the guys who are here for the stream, welcome back. Got a bunch of guys in here. We got the Bastard 2025. We got Mike Emberson in here, Randall, Steve, we got Clifford as always, JT, how's it going, man? We got Dan, Ulysses, Pickle Rick, ton of guys in here, Richard, Clayton, Miguel, Zach, Ian, Carlos, how's it going, everybody? Everyone just saying, hey, what's up? So good to see everyone on the stream. We already got 50 people on, and so today I'm doing something a little bit different. Normally, I break down the Patreon members' lakes during my live streams, and I'll try to look at 3 lakes during the stream. But today I wanted to switch it up just because I was thinking that content was getting a little bit stale doing it every single week. And so what I want to do today is talk about my tournament practice fishing tips for guys who are actually going to go fish in a tournament and have the luxury of having a day to go on the lake before the tournament, and how to best utilize that time and how to best find fish in your practice so that you can actually catch fish in your tournament, hopefully put a limit in the boat and cash a check or even win. And so what I want to do is run through some questions that I got from my Patreon subscribers. And if we transition over here really quick, give me 1 second. There we go. This is my Patreon page. And for those of you who haven't been to my Patreon page, it's a place where you guys can donate to the channel, which helps me make more content. It supports the content I'm making. And for all my Patreon members, you get special perks like putting in questions for my live streams, submitting lakes for me to break down on my live streams. I also post polls on video ideas and things like that. So a lot of great content on my Patreon page. So the link is over here in the bottom right corner if you want to check it out. And actually, I'm not really getting too many questions. I posted this actually kind of late last night before I went to bed, and so there weren't too many responses. So the chances of you actually getting a response are pretty good right now, or getting your question answered. So definitely go to my Patreon page and check that out if you haven't. And if you're also on my Patreon page, please go answer these questions on the polls. It really helps me out and helps me get more content tailored for you. But otherwise, got some really good questions here from my Patreon subscribers. So I'm going to go kind of down the line one by one and answer the questions that these guys on my Patreon page asked. And then once we get through those, I'm going to open up the floor to everyone else for you guys to ask questions as well. And so first thing I wanted to do was go through kind of high level how I practice, how I think about practice, then kind of get into all these questions. So first up, when I'm thinking about practice fishing, the big thing I try to keep in mind is how much time I have to practice. And so let me transition this over here so you're not blinded by this screen really quick, and we'll switch back over here in 1 second. So when I'm fishing for a tournament, I normally have a couple different ways I get to practice. One, I get 0 practice, and that's always really stressful sometimes because you are putting money in for a tournament you've never fished out there on that lake before. Maybe you fish that lake all the time, but you maybe haven't fished it for 3 or 4 weeks and you have no idea what the fish are doing. The other is when you have a practice day the week before the tournament. So let's say your tournament is on this upcoming weekend and you can actually get out on the lake and fish, but you actually had to practice last Sunday or Saturday. And so now there's going to be 7 days between your tournament and your practice day. And the weather conditions can completely change. The fish can completely change with the weather. You might have different conditions, everything like that. The other practice days are when you can fish right before the tournament, like the tournament's on a Saturday and you can go fish on a Friday. And there's also times when you can actually pre-fish for 3 or 4 days in advance of a tournament. And so all these different types of practice situations are going to cause their own challenges. And so, what I want to talk about first is the idea of having one day of practice, and that's going to be where I start. I'll also talk about all the other different types, but normally the most common for tournament guys is that they have one day of practice. And we switch back over actually to my, let's see here, my Patreon page. Give me 1 second. You'll see one of the questions here is from Richard Hutchinson. He says, will it help to fish a week in advance to find out what type of places to fish or find fish? And a lot of times, and then up here, I'm reading this other comment, and then Michael Secrest says, I fished tournaments, but most of the time I can only practice on Saturday, the week before the tournament. And a lot of times the conditions change throughout the week. And I struggle to consistently catch a limit. Suggestions. So I'm going to answer these two questions first, and then I'll get into the other questions in a minute. So first up, let's tackle the situation where you have one day of practice and you're practicing the week before the tournament. What would I do? So one thing that I really like to advocate for people who are practice fishing is, one, don't spend so much time fishing in your practice days. A lot of guys will fish, if they have 8 hours of practice, they may fish for 7 of those 8 hours. If you have 10 hours of practice, they'll spend 9 out of those 10 hours practicing, maybe an hour or 30 minutes graphing or driving around. And I like to do the complete opposite of that, especially when I'm practicing one day before a tournament. So to give you an idea of what I do, I picked out a lake here. This is Lake Hudson in Oklahoma, and it's a lake that I fished tournaments on. Actually won my first tournament I ever fished out here, and I've only fished one tournament out here, so I'm 1 for 1 on tournament wins on this lake. And I went out with only one day of practice the week before this tournament, and I ended up catching about 14 and a half, 15 pounds of fish. And I caught all my fish in the last 20 or less 2 hours of the fishing day. And I caught my 2 biggest fish in the last 25 minutes. And what happened is that I went out and practice fished, and basically what I did is I just started here on the lower end of the lake, and I just started fishing down some of these banks on the lower end. I ran up the lake, fished down some of this riprap. I randomly fished down these banks and, fished around these corners. I ran up to this riprap. I fished all around here. Spent my whole day fishing, didn't catch many fish, and I didn't graph around. I didn't look for good areas to fish. And so what happened tournament day is that, one, I had no fish found because I didn't catch any the week before. And second, I had no areas to fish because I basically only looked at the areas I actually casted the line in, and obviously all those areas weren't working out. So my tournament day came around, and I had to scratch everything and basically start from zero. And this is really tough when you're fishing in a tournament, you want to do well, and you're on no fish. And so I basically ran around the lake with like a chicken with my head cut off for a long time. So I ran all the way up to the top end of this lake, and I happened to catch one 4-pounder right here off of this isolated stick. It's like kind of a brush pile or a bush that's off this shoreline, and it was submerged underwater. I actually have this lake drawn down. You can see my marks over here on the side, but the lake is normally higher, and if you look at the lake, you can see that area I was looking at right there is completely underwater. You can't see anything there, but if we take it back in time, you can see there's that little piece of brush. You can see the brush right there, and then you take it back, and you can just barely see it. But basically, I caught that one fish on that isolated stick or that bush out in the middle of the lake, and that gave me a clue on what I needed to do. And so I started running that in practice. I ran up and down this lake looking for these isolated trees and laydowns and stuff. I caught a couple keepers off this laydown. There's a bunch of laydowns up and down this river that I caught fish on. Actually, I caught one right off of, there's actually some isolated laydowns right in here that I caught some fish on. And then I ran down the lake and I found some isolated laydowns off this roadbed. And so you can see there's a laydown here, there's a laydown here, and a couple more around this area. And that's where I caught my 15 pounds of fish. But I only caught them in the last, like I said, maybe 2 hours of the day. And actually it was really inefficient because I had never looked for any of these laydowns in practice, so I had to just drive down the lake and try to visually find them, and I was wasting a lot of time going into areas where there was just one laydown and stuff, and it was not working out very well for me. And so From that fishing day, the reason I picked this lake in particular is because it really opened my eyes to how I think I should practice fish. And so the way I go about practice fishing now that's very different from when I fished this tournament, which was my freshman year of college about 7 years ago, was that the the big thing I learned from this fishing day is that I need to find a lot of different types of areas in practice and not worry so much about catching fish in practice, and instead try to find a lot of unique offshore, maybe hidden type areas that I can fish that I can duplicate around the lake, and they're things that other fishermen are not going to be fishing. And so that was kind of long winded, and I'm going to make a video on this, and it'll be a lot more succinct and clear to understand. It's kind of hard to elaborate all of this just on the live stream, but basically, what I like to do if I'm pre-fishing for a tournament on the Saturday before an event where I have 7 days between a tournament, I don't focus at all on fishing. I actually spend maybe an hour of a 10-hour practice day fishing, and I spend the other 9 hours just driving around the lake. And what I'm looking for are places where the fish are going to be able to congregate that are not super visible and super easy for guys to see. Because what happens a lot of times is that when you're fishing in a tournament, there's going to be 70 boats, 80 boats on the water, and all the most obvious cover is going to get hit. There's going to be a guy who fishes down this riprap bank around here. There's going to be a guy who's going to be fishing some of the more obvious stretches of boat docks that have really good water on them and places that are very very, very obvious to the eye to see. And so all these places are what people call community holes. And most of the time when guys are fishing, they fish down the bank, they cast at the bank at visible cover, or they fish the most obvious types of structure offshore. And so if we actually switch over here to Navionics, this is something that actually is really interesting for guys who like to fish offshore. Now that all these guys have good electronics and stuff like that, it's really obvious to go down these lakes and say, oh, let's zoom in here and find the most obvious looking ledges on this lake. Well, right here, that's a nice, really good looking ledge right here. You have a drop from 10 feet of water down to 29 feet of water. Looks great. You also have a nice, couple more little points that stick out here with the ledge going across. And I talk about all these spots in my videos normally. And I always say these are awesome spots to fish, and they are. The problem, though, is that now that there's guys like me and a lot of other instruction out there teaching you where to find fish on these lakes, it's really easy for a guy to just go around the lake, see, oh, there's a nice little point. It's 30 foot of water. You have a little ledge right here with a nice little point, and that's a spot that I definitely want to check out come tournament day. And that makes it really difficult to actually go out and find and catch fish on a tournament day, because what'll happen is you either have the local guys who know about all these spots, or you'll have all of the guys who are good with their electronics finding these spots right away and pounding them. And even if there's fish there, if you have 7 or 8 or 9 guys hitting the same ledge over the course of a day, those fish never get a chance to rest. And even though the first guy who pulls up on the spot might catch 3 or 4 fish, a lot of times after about maybe the first 2 hours of the day, the spot is pretty much wiped. And you may be able to pull off a fish or two, slowing down, fishing finesse baits, drop shots, stuff like that. But what happens is that these spots just get pounded by guys who know what they're doing. And so instead of trying to go out and fish these really obvious community holes in practice and see if there's fish there and waste all my time fishing the community holes that I know everyone's going to be fishing, I look for stuff that's a little more subtle, out of the way, and stuff that guys are not going to be looking for either in practice or in their tournaments. So for example, I pulled up a ton of spots over here on my Google Earth map, and I use Google Earth so much for practice, especially pre-practice for my practice days. And what I'll do is, let's say the week before my practice day on a Wednesday or Thursday night, I'll pull up Google Earth and I'll scroll through the lake and I'll look for a shallower pocket like this, and then I'll go up here to the top bar. This is Google Earth Pro. I have a whole video on how to use Google Earth. It's a Google Earth Tips. It's really good. And so basically what you can do is go up here to this top bar and click this button that says Show Historical Imagery. You click on that and you can see the lake at different times when Google Earth actually, the Google actually went through and took satellite images of the lake, you can scroll back in time and find images when the lake is drawn down below normal pool. And so if you're lucky, you can find an image like this, where you actually have the lake drawn down really low. And so what I do is I just go in, and then you guys know I do this on my live streams very regularly. But what I'm looking for in particular when I'm practicing for tournaments, not when I'm just going out and fun fishing, but when I'm really trying to catch fish consistently in tournaments, is I'm looking for stuff that's very subtle, that's underwater, and that guys might not be able to find on a contour line map or with their naked eye where they can visually see it. And so those are going to be things like this road right here. We actually have a bridge that sticks out. There's a creek that comes in here. You can see this on Google Earth really well, but if we switch over to Navionics, go back over here, we go back in this pocket, you can see that there is maybe like a road. It shows a road bed in here, but actually the road is like right here. And it looks like it's a shallow flat that's a foot of water that looks like literally nothing. But if we go back over to Google Earth really quick, you can see that there's actually that bridge there right here. And so no one's seeing that. This ditch doesn't even show up on the map, but these are the type of areas that the fish can congregate on, and they'll sit here all year. These are the type of areas that these fish don't just get on in the summertime or the fall or the winter. They'll get on these areas a lot of different times in the year. And so these are the type of areas are really good to look for. I'm also looking for little shallow areas in the backs of flats. Like here's a little ditch. You can see there's still some water kind of visible right here. And then it swings into this little pocket. There's a little deeper pocket in here. Again, it looks super shallow on the Navionics map. I also look for stuff like this isolated big stump that I can actually see on Google Earth. And this is an isolated stump that's in the middle of this big flat. It's kind of in this little depression or ditch. And it's about maybe a cast length away from the bank, but it's still in maybe 2 to 3 feet of water. And these are places where the fish will congregate. And they'll pull up on either in the pre-spawn, the post-spawn, or the spawn. Or they'll pull up here even in the fall, and sometimes if the current's running, they can pull up here on shallow, dirty water lakes even in the summer. And so what I can do is then just scroll around the lake and look for these unique things, like there's a rock right here I marked. Or if we scroll out of here, we can go over here and I'll come over to this area, and you can see that there's a road bed that sticks out here, and I'm marking it with these dots or these markers, and you can actually save these pins to your fish finder. And I have, again, it's in that video. It's my 3 top Google Earth tips. I'll link the video down in the description of this video after I'm done, and you can go over here. You can see isolated stumps off the bank here that you wouldn't be able to see on Navionics. You also wouldn't be able to see with your naked eye, but you can pick these out on Google Earth before you go. And again, I'm just going to keep going through here and kind of show you some more stuff I'm looking for. Again, got a big stump that's next to a road bed right here, so I mark that road. There's a little house foundation right here with some stumps. And then I have another house foundation. If you notice, all these places I'm looking for are either man-made cover or big obvious cover that you can see from Google Earth. And it's basically at least a cast length away from the bank or a half cast length away from the bank. So stuff that's off the shore that guys aren't going to be able to find just by looking at a Navionics map. Like I said, everyone knows how to use a Navionics map nowadays. It's not that special to be able to learn how to, or to know how to read one. So you have to look for these really subtle, isolated pieces of cover. Like if we scroll over here, you have another little house foundation right here. Actually, no, that's a house foundation because I've graphed it before. Or a big rock and a big stump right here. Or here, another bridge out in the middle of this flat. And not all lakes have these good images of Google Earth drawn down, but a lot of lakes do, like a ton of lakes do. And you can even look for more subtle stuff down the bank, like right over here. This is a spot where I actually caught like 14 pounds in 7 casts one year. And it's literally a little ditch. I'll actually delete this so you guys can see what it is. But it's just a little ditch into the shoreline that sticks in right here. It's very, very subtle. But those fish were setting up in that ditch right in there, and the fish were going crazy in there. And that's one spot that I've caught them really well before in the fall. And again, it's super subtle. You wouldn't be able to see it unless you're really scrolling through the map, looking through the lake for these subtle areas. And again, it's basically like a half cast length away from the bank. But those are the type of areas that can be really, really good when you're going to tournament fishing, because most guys, again, are going to roll into this pocket. They're just going to fish down this bank. They might fish a spinnerbait or a crankbait or flip a jig or maybe fish like a Senko if it's the spawn. And they'll just fish down this area, not really thinking too much, just making random casts. And then oh, there's a nice little ditch out here. Maybe I need to make casts off the bank into this ditch. Or maybe I need to focus on this little ditch that sticks out here. Or going over here, maybe you can mark with your Google Earth that you'll see 2 isolated laydowns in the back of a pocket. And these are all just places that are really easy to see on Google Earth, but you wouldn't know they were there unless you took the time to idle into every single one of these pockets. And what I like to do when I'm practice fishing is spend a lot of time driving in and out of areas to look for stuff like these isolated laydowns in the back of this pocket. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drive pretty much every pocket and say, okay, which banks have good grass on them? Which banks have good rock on them? Is there a rock transition down there? Is there some bluff walls in there? On my graph, am I seeing any bait fish? Am I seeing hydrilla underneath the boat? Where are the grass lines? And all these different things I'm just going to kind of take in during my 10-hour practice day. And I'm going to try to basically put a bunch of gas in my boat. I'm going to start on the lower end of the lake, and I'm going to roll into these pockets, and I'm going to use these waypoints that I found to kind of identify areas I think look good, and then I'll know, okay, I know there's some ditches and some stumps and some rocks I can see on Google Earth, but then I'm going to roll in here, and I'm just going to drive through these pockets, drive like 6-7 miles an hour, look on my graph, pay attention to water temperature, water clarity, if there's shad in the area, stuff like that. And if I pull into this area and I see there's shad all over the graph, the water has a good visibility to it, water temperatures are in the mid-50s, and I am seeing some activity in the area, I'll think, okay, this could be a really good pre-spawn area or a good area in the fall. Or if I'm driving down out over here, on this roadbed, and I see this roadbed, and I graph out here, and I don't see anything up shallow, but then once we get to the center of this creek, I find that there's a good roadbed spot out here. I can say, oh, cool, this is a good little area to fish in the summertime when the water's warmer, especially if I see arches or see bait around these areas. And so basically what I'm doing is just trying to identify high percentage areas that I like to fish during my tournament. And because I'm practicing a week ahead of time, I don't want to actually fish these areas, because what you can do a lot of times is roll into this area and you can say, oh, I started crushing them on this roadbed, on this bridge last weekend because water temperatures were 55 degrees. It was cloudy, overcast. They were pulled up on this bridge, and I was just crushing them on a crankbait or a jig or something like that out here. But then during the week, you get 5 days in a row of 70-degree weather, and those fish push straight to the bank, and they want to start thinking about spawning now. And so I know these fish are in this general area because they were spawning here, but I was catching them here. But you may have the preconceived notion of, oh, I just caught 19 pounds of fish last weekend on this bridge. I'm going to spend an hour fishing this bridge just to give it a shot to see if they're there. Where instead, I'll go in a tournament day and I'll roll in this area and I'll say, okay, water temperatures are now 61 degrees. I graph over this little bridge and I don't see any shad activity or fish on the graph. So I'm just going to skip right over this, not waste that hour of fishing, and I'm going to start running to like this little ditch over here or try to fish this isolated stump, even though maybe the weekend before, if I had fished these areas, I wouldn't have gotten bit at all because the fish hadn't moved there yet. And so it allows me to be a lot more versatile and fish the moment by looking during my practice days for these type of areas that are subtle, and then looking at the entire area to see, okay, is there grass down this bank, or do I really like a row of bushes that's here that's very visible? And then I can start putting together an area that I like to fish, or start putting together a pattern that I like to fish. And so hopefully that kind of all making sense. I've been talking a lot about a lot of different stuff. I've kind of been rambling for a little bit here, but hopefully that's all making sense. And once you get to a tournament day, you'll have hopefully 30 to 80 spots marked on your graph between your Google Earth waypoints you dropped and transferred to your graph, or just driving around looking in these areas. And again, you haven't fished very much. You've maybe spent an hour of your 10-hour practice day fishing. So that means the day of the tournament, you're going to have to run into these areas and you're going to have to say, okay, let me start either deeper or let me start shallower and try to figure out what the fish are doing today. And normally what I'll do is I'll try to evaluate where I think the fish are and start on the best looking area I drove by during my practice session. So I'll start in the best 2 or 3 areas first thing in the morning, Normally try to start on shallower areas in general, whether that's in the summertime or in the winter, start in the shallower areas. And then once I figure out that the fish are either up shallow or they're not up shallow, I'll start working my way around. So I might run first thing to these isolated laydowns in the back of this pocket because, I mean, this is an area that a lot of guys, especially like this weekend, would be fishing because it's really obvious. And so if I roll in here and the water temperatures are 62, 63 degrees, I know the fish are spawning, and I crack a 4-pounder off these laydowns. Well, then I'm going to say, oh, okay, there we go. I already have a good pattern. Now let me try to replicate that around the lake. And so I run over here and I'm like, okay, where did I see another laydown in the back of a pocket that looked really good? Oh, I run over here and I remember seeing 3 or 4 really good laydowns off of this bank. So now I run all the way back up here and I will fish these 3 or 4 laydowns, crack a 3-pounder or a 4-pounder. And then I start running that pattern around the lake and just focused on those isolated laydowns, and I'll put a good limit in the boat. Or I'll come in, I'll fish these laydowns, and I don't catch anything, and I'll start working my way over to this like ditch, and I'll see if there's some post-spawn fish in this ditch. Or maybe run and fish this isolated rock out here with a crankbait or a lizard or a jig or something. Then maybe fish this road or this bridge. And check these different areas, and whatever I get bit on, that's what I'm going to try to replicate around the lake. And if I'm doing a good job, I'm hopefully finding areas that are similar. So if I found this rock here, boom, I found another rock here. If I find a bridge here, boom, I found another bridge way down here. So I found a second bridge. So now I have areas that I can replicate around the lake. Another example would be up on this part of the lake. I can run over to this area, and I can say, oh, look, there's 1, 2, 3 boat ramps. Maybe I can start catching fish on spinner baits or jigs around these boat ramps. And if I catch a fish on this boat ramp and a fish on this boat ramp and maybe not off this one, I'm like, okay, there's fish sitting on boat ramps. Now I'm going to run up here, and I remember in practice I drove by in this pocket, and I noted that there's 1 boat ramp, 2 boat ramps, 3 boat ramps in the back of this creek. I'll run here, I'll fish those boat ramps, and I'll catch more fish. And so it's all about, again, pattern recognition, identifying which areas are there, but also in practice, getting as much information as you can on what types of areas are around you. So where are the high spots? Where are the roads? Where are the ditches? And a lot of times fish don't bite the same way weekend to weekend in a tournament. So one weekend you might be catching them in the little ditches. The next weekend you might be catching them off boat ramps. The next weekend you might be catching them off house foundations or laydowns in the backs of the creeks, or maybe fishing offshore. So just because you catch fish in practice one way does not mean you're going to catch them that way in a tournament. And a lot of guys on the Bassmaster Elite Series make their money by doing exactly what I'm talking about here. They graph around the lake, they drive around the lake looking for these isolated pieces of cover, these isolated structures, and identifying them in practice, not fishing very much, and then making the adjustments and adapting during their fishing day on the lake to put their fish in the boat. And that's how Brian Thrift and Jacob Wheeler and Andy Morgan and a lot of other really good fishermen catch all their fish in these tournaments. Is they identify the good looking areas, they don't fish them in practice, but they note them and they come back and catch them later on. And so that's the way that I would target tournament practice when I have a day a week before a tournament. And the only thing I would call out that I forgot to mention is that when you're running into an area like this and you have this like isolated stump during a tournament day, sometimes I'll just run and fish the isolated stump, but a lot of times I won't. A lot of times I'll actually fish about 50 yards on both sides of the stump, just to kind of fish a little bit more water, just in case maybe there are fish that are just down this random bank, or it's easier than I'm making it, because sometimes you can make it too complicated. You can focus on just fishing isolated stumps or something and spend your whole day just running with your head cut off all around the lake. And so I'll roll in here to this area, I'll have the stump marked, but I'll maybe fish down this bank here, flip the isolated bushes, fish a spinnerbait down this bank, then make 4, 5, 6 good casts on the stump, work down here. And if I catch fish off the stump and nothing off these banks, then I'm like, okay, I know what's going on. I'm going to look for now more isolated stumps all around this lake. But if I just catch fish just fishing down the bank and I don't catch them one off the stump, I'm just going to keep fishing down this bank. And sometimes you can just fish down the bank and just catch them, and you don't have to make it super complicated. So tons of questions coming in the comments. I'm going to answer them really quick. See here. I'm gonna go through the comments really quick. I know I've been speeding through all this. I've just been getting into it. I love talking about this stuff. So I want to do a live stream on it because I have so much information in my head that I want to get out to you guys because I think about practice fishing so much. And I'm gonna be doing a lot more videos on it this summer because I'm gonna be fishing tournaments and hopefully break it down in a more concise, easy to consume way than me just blabbering for an hour straight. But anyways, let me run through some of these comments real quick, then we'll get to more Patreon questions. Bunch of guys saying, hey, Miguel, we got Perry, we got Keith, what's up, man? So let's see here. Les said, won our bass tournament this past weekend on Lake Wisconsin, up here in Wisconsin, Tough Lake. Found an eddy on the river and use your tips from your previous videos. That's awesome, man. I'm getting a lot of comments, guys, from you guys saying that you've taken what I've learned and won tournaments, or you've gone to the exact spots I've marked during my live streams and actually caught fish on those in those tournaments and won tournaments on spots I show you. I've been hearing that a ton recently, so really glad that the spots I'm showing you are helping and the information I'm giving you is helping you do well in tournaments too. It's definitely really cool to hear. So a bunch of guys answer questions. So let's see here. Wayne Middleton says, would you break down a shallow lake with not many underwater features? Yes, I could definitely do that. I've looked at a few lakes like that in the past, Wayne, on my past live streams, but I know it's kind of hard to scroll through a ton of live streams, but I can look at one of those in the future here. If you guys do have questions, please leave a comment in the stream, but put at fish the moment and put a bunch of question marks at the end of your question. Those are the ones I'm going to read and answer. It's a lot easier for me to find them in the stream of messages. So anyways, just do that and it would really help me out. So JP says, sup Johnny, good to see you, man. Let's see here. Got a bunch of guys answer in 1 second here. I'm just trying to read through. Okay, here we go. Ian Wagner says, I've read a lot of anglers removing their hooks for pre-fishing tournaments so it doesn't turn off fish. Thoughts? Great idea. I really like to remove the hooks off of my baits. And so basically what I do in practice is I either bend in my hooks on my crankbaits, so I might just get the stock hooks that I get on crankbaits. I always switch out my hooks and stuff like that, but I'll bend in my hooks on crankbaits, or I'll put a rubber shrink wrap keeper around the hooks on my jigs or my buzz baits, stuff like that. Especially if I can have some like old rusty baits, I'll use those in practice a lot, like rusty buzz baits with bad hooks or rusty jigs, and I'll just put that shrink wrap or saran or not saran wrap. That's not going to work. But the shrink wrap and use a blow dryer and shrink wrap down those hooks, and that will keep my hook protected and the fish won't be able to grab the bait. And that way when they bite it, I can just shake those fish off. And that's really good when you're pre-fishing a week or the day before a tournament. It's not that big of a deal if you're pre-fishing a week before the tournament. I don't bother. I just catch the fish I catch. But if I'm pre-fishing the day before a tournament, I always put these shrink wrap around my hook points. Bass Quest, thanks so much for the $2 super chat. Caleb, how's it going, man? Hope you fish Chickamauga. Definitely want to head out there with you, Caleb, out to Chickamauga. So excited to get out there and catch some giants. But hopefully I answer your question there, Ian. Michael says, Johnny may be young, but he is the most informative YouTuber, and he's a smart kid. Love watching this guy. Appreciate that, Michael. Really appreciate that. Okay, Mimo. Oh, 1 second here. Johnny, I have a question for you. Which topwater lure do you prefer? The whopper plopper versus a popper? So kind of depends. I like to fish a whopper plopper when I want to cover water and work quickly. And I also fish a buzzbait. I kind of interchange the buzzbait and the whopper plopper. Though I like to fish the whopper plopper when I'm fishing around very little cover. And then when I'm fishing around a lot of cover, I'll fish the buzzbait. I seem to get a lot more bites, I think, on the whopper plopper just because it's not as well, a lot of people are fishing it now. It was the point where not that many people are fishing it, but a lot of times I just stick with the buzz bait. And then I also like to fish a popper, but that's when I know there's fish in the area, and I work that bait really slow and let it sit in the fish's face. And a lot of times when the bite's tough, you can catch them on that popper as opposed to the whopper plopper because you can really let that bait sit. It's a lot more subtle than the whopper plopper, stuff like that. Roger says, do you ever print out your Google Maps? Is it a better idea? It gives you a better idea of what to look for on that waypoint. So I actually will print out the maps sometimes like let's say you take these waypoints, you save them to your fish finder, still all you're going to have is you're going to have a bridge, this ditch, and this stump marked. And you won't be able to see any of these other good contours. So if there is an area where I'm like, this place looks good, I will print out these maps, just like in black and white or whatever, and bring them with me on the lake just so I can see, okay, here's where the turns are, here's where this ditch comes in, and when I get out on the lake, I can kind of see it a little bit better. So I definitely do that, Roger, especially if I'm fishing for like real, like I'm really serious about tournaments. When I'm just going out for my videos nowadays, I don't put that much effort into it, but the more effort you put in, the better chance you have of actually doing well in tournaments, especially in the pre-preparation. Let's see here. Raj asking on practice day, do you fish more, observe more, or watch your depth finder? So I think I answered that a little bit earlier, but definitely drive and watch my depth finder. I rarely fish, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Bill Gibson says, fish first tournament on this Saturday using your tips. I'm set. Awesome. And then let's see here. T says, you plan doing map study on Lake Fork. I'm going to be doing some stock lake maps on Lake Fork for my website. You can go to my website and buy a lake breakdown, and I'll be doing those for Lake Fork, Sam Rayburn, Toledo Bend, some lakes in Kentucky, some lakes in Georgia, South Carolina area for sure. And so I'll be having those lakes for sale on my website starting maybe mid-May to June time, and you'll be able to buy like a map with 50 different spots marked up with commentary on where to fish, seasons to fish those spots, the conditions to fish them in, instructions, all that stuff. So definitely check out my website for those coming up. I'm really excited to put those up there. So getting a ton more questions, but what I want to do is I want to go back to answer some more questions from our Patreon members because we're already so far into the stream. I've been talking forever, I feel like, but let me switch over to my Patreon page real quick. So again, this is my Patreon page. Guys, on my Patreon page, we'll submit questions that I'll answer on my live streams a little bit more in depth than just the quick questions in the chat. And so you can join my Patreon page by going over to the link in the bottom right corner over there. It's patreon.com/fishthemoment. And so next question I wanted to cover was Richards. He says, time management during a tournament. And another question here is from Garrett, and he says, what point in the tournament should you abandon your original plan if it's not producing? So I think those kind of go hand in hand, so I'm going to answer those two questions together, and I'll get to Calvin's question at the end, because it's a good way to wrap this all up. And so, let's see here. Switch back over to Google Earth. Give me 1 second here, guys. There we go. So now let's talk about time management in a fishing day. I'll get back to the different other different types of practice days in a second, but time management during a practice day is really important. And so what I like to do during during the tournament day, like time management during the tournament. So normally what I like to do during a tournament is, let's say I've gone out now, I have 40 to 70 spots marked on my graph. And I have all these areas, and I'm like, okay, I'm launching my boat from here. This is where the tournament's taken out. Where do I go? I haven't caught any fish in practice because I only fish for an hour. I have no idea what the fish are doing on this given day. All I know is what the water temperature is at the boat ramp, what the conditions are going to be during the day as far as weather and air temperatures, stuff like that. And I have kind of an idea of what the fish were doing last weekend. So from that, how am I supposed to manage my time well so I can hit as many of these spots as possible, hopefully find a pattern, and have enough time left in my day to catch fish? Well, the way I think about it in a tournament is that normally it only takes 5 casts to put a good limit in the boat. You can sometimes pull up on the spot and catch 5 fish on back-to-back-to-back casts that weigh 20 pounds. I've done it probably 10 to 15 times in tournaments in my life where I just pull up on the spot, I catch 5 fish, boom, 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 boom. Or so many times in tournaments, I just pull up on the spot, and within an hour, I'll put a limit in the boat. I'll fish around all around the lake, and I'll pull up on one spot, and I catch my 5 fish off that spot. And in a single day tournament, that's all you need. You don't need that spot to reload. You don't need to have a ton of fish on it. And so, like I was talking about earlier, if you go over to Navionics, a lot of times what happens in a tournament day is Guys are going to pull up on the most obvious looking spots out here, these nice, good ledges out here on the river, especially like summertime fishing, or they're going to fish the best looking pockets and bays. And they'll roll through here and they'll catch their 5 fish, and there may be 1,000 fish in this bay. Or off this spot, there might be 500 fish sitting off this ledge. And if you pull up at the right time and you catch these fish, that's great. You caught some fish, you did well, good job, you won the tournament off the community hole. But it rarely happens like that because on Saturdays, these fish get so pressured that they'll push off and suspend out here off the break, or they may only bite in like a 5-minute window throughout the day because they're so pressured. And so instead of doing that, what I try to do is I stay away from the big community holes and I look for really subtle stuff. So like if we go over here off this map, stuff that I'm gonna be looking for that's really subtle is, let's go, I'm going to try to find the spot real quick. So like if we go down here, you can see all these spots are very, very obvious. You have a nice hump out here right in the mouth between a creek and a ditch. That's so obvious. Or even like right here, you have a subtle little creek that comes in, still pretty obvious area. An area that's a lot less obvious is if we go up around the corner, is maybe right here you'll see that there's a little bit deeper water that swings in and it cuts against this subtle little point. And so it's 22 feet of water here, 18 foot here, 13 on top. This area right here is very, very, very subtle. And these fish might set up on areas like this area right here, this area right here. Not many fish are going to be set up here because it's further off the main river channel. It's not super obvious. It's not where the textbooks tell you the fish are always going to be. But these are the type of areas that may have a school of 5 to 20 bass on it. And if you can get those 5 to 20 bass to bite, you're going to be doing really well in a tournament. A lot of times these places will still hold 3, 4, 5 pound bass. And so looking for these really subtle offshore areas, or looking for a really subtle area, if we switch back over to our Google Earth, if we go up here and we say, oh, I found this random boat ramp pattern. No one else is running a boat ramp pattern, but I found 1, 2, 3 boat ramps, and then I found 3 more back up in this creek. Maybe I can catch between these 6 boat ramps. If I catch 2 fish, that's still pretty good. Then all I have to do is find around this entire lake, if I'm catching a fish every 3 boat ramps, I need to find 9 more boat ramps and I'm going to catch a limit of fish. And if I'm catching 3-pounders off of that, well, then it's not that big of a chore to go run around the lake and say, okay, where are some boat ramps I'm seeing? Oh, right here. 1 more boat ramp right there. Or maybe you run back in some of these creeks. Let me try to find a few more boat ramps that are around these areas. There's a boat ramp right in here somewhere that people launch at. Are there any more boat ramps back in this creek? You get the idea, though. There's boat ramps right here. So I'll run around the lake and I'll look for these boat ramps. And again, there's not that many fish on these areas. It's not a community hole. It's not places where you're going to be able to catch a ton of fish, and it's not going to reload. But if you can catch your 5 fish off of your 15 boat ramps that you fish in the day, you have enough fish to weigh in your tournament. And so all that being said, getting back to my original question of how do I spend my time fishing in a tournament, I fish as many areas as possible in these kind of off-the-wall areas, or places that are offshore, places that are a little bit less specific, until I get a bite. And so what I'll do is I'll run over here, I'll fish this house foundation. Let's say I'm fishing in the pre-spawn, and I know the fish are just going to be staging out in front of these banks. First I'll run and fish this house foundation. Then I'll run and fish these stumps in this road and this foundation over here. Then I'll run back over here and I'll try to fish some stumps out here and fish this road. And I'm going to spend no more than 10 minutes on each of these spots. So in theory, I can hit this spot, maybe these rocks out here, maybe this rock and this bridge, this ditch, this hump, and those laydowns. That's 6 spots right there. I can hit all 6 of those spots in 1 hour. And if I do that for 3 hours, that means that I'm going to be hitting about 18 spots in 3 hours. And if you're looking at good water, you identified in practice that there's bait fish in these areas, there's good water temperature, there's good water clarity, all these different things, you'll know that you're going to put your bait potentially in front of a fish on any of these 18 areas, and all it takes is 1 bite. And if you can get 1 bite on one of those 18 areas, then you can hopefully then replicate that pattern around the lake because you found similar areas all around the lake. Then you can run more rocks or more foundations all up and down this lake. And because you spent 9 hours driving around the lake, you were able to identify lots of foundations, lots of rocks, lots of road beds. And you never know on a given fishing day if the fish are on the ditches or the foundations or the roads, but you spend 10 minutes per spot, try to fish as many spots, 6 spots in an hour. And even if it takes you 6 hours to figure that out, 6 times 6, that's 36 spots in 6 hours. The chances of you putting a fish in the boat on 36 spots is very, very, very high. And hopefully, then if you figure out one spot where you can get bit in 36, you can then replicate that around the lake and pattern that around the lake. And then in the last 2 hours of your fishing day, hopefully just fish those isolated pieces of cover or those different types of drops or a certain type of rock bank, whatever you find, and then spend the last 2 hours just putting the fish in the boat. And that's how the pros do it. That's how they consistently put limits in the boat. That's how I do it. And that's how I haven't zeroed in the bass fishing tournament since the first tournament I fished in my boat when I was 15 years old. And so that's the last time I zeroed in a tournament. I've caught limits in more tournaments than I've zeroed by way, way, way more times. And I've caught way more limits than one fish days as well. I catch, limits probably 5 times more often than I catch just one fish in a fishing day. And so, before I get to that, Keith the trucker says $20. Super Chat, he says flipping a bush, football head, or arky head, and why? So flipping bushes, Keith, what I like to fish is like the arky head or a pointed headed jig like the Striking Hack Attack jig. I really like that jig for flipping bushes because it is a little more streamlined, it's more pointed, and goes through the brush really well. And if we pull up Tackle Warehouse really quick, I can show you that. So Tackle Warehouse here, if we go to football jig, oops, you can see a football jig has a very, round head. It looks like a football, and so all those extra points that stick out are going to get, they're going to hit the limbs of those trees, and it's going to cause it to fall a little bit worse, and it can't slide through the cracks of those bushes. So if you're fishing really thick bushes, one, it's hard to get those fish out, and also if you're flipping that jig in there and you set the hook and the jig is on the outside of that fish's mouth, that jig will hit the bushes as the fish is coming out, and it'll knock that jig free. And that happens a lot to me when I'm fishing jigs in brush piles, unfortunately, where you'll set the hook, you'll think you got them, and as they're coming out of the brush pile, your jig will hit the tree because it's on the outside of their mouth, and they'll come off. But if you're fishing the Hack Attack heavy cover jig, there's other jigs like this. It's this one right here. You can see this head is a lot more pointed and narrow, and it goes through those brush piles a little bit better, or those bushes a little bit better. I still like the football jig when I'm fishing offshore just because it gives me a little bit better feel when I'm fishing around the rocks and stuff around the brush. But this jig is what I go to when I'm flipping bushes, and it works really well for me. And normally I flip braid when I'm flipping bushes. I don't use fluorocarbon too much, especially if I'm fishing the jig. If I'm fishing bushes without a jig, if I'm fishing with like a plastic or like a sweet beaver or a, whatever type of creature bait, I'll flip that with 25 or 20 pound fluorocarbon. So hopefully that makes sense. So let me switch back over real quick to Google Earth. I know I've been kind of rambling a lot in this live stream. I didn't really have anything super planned out. I was gonna talk through how I break down practice days. So hopefully this is all making sense. So anyways, so where I was going with all this again is time management during a practice day, and I'll make a video on this as well to kind of give you a more succinct, better thought out process on this, or actually take time to build a story around it. But basically, trying to hit as many spots as you can until you find that pattern. Then once you find it, replicating it around the lake on spots you've already found. And again, the key is to get this to work is you have to find these areas ahead of time. You can't focus on fishing during practice because if you fish, the chance of you finding 7 or 8 ditches on your lake before your tournament is like 0% because you're fishing so much, you're not going to be able to find these ditches and look for them on the lake. So if you pull up in your tournament day and you catch a fish off of this ditch right here, okay, cool, you've caught a fish off this ditch by this boat dock, but then you only have one ditch by a boat dock found in the entire lake. How are you going to replicate that pattern? You won't. But if you then have this ditch by boat dock and you've spent some time looking around, you notice that there is another ditch by this boat dock right here. And you've driven by this, you've noted that. And then, you can just kind of note that around the lake of where you see similar types of cover. And I leave a ton of waypoints on my graph. Before a tournament, I might have 100 to 150 waypoints up and down this lake. And I'll normally color code my waypoints. If I see a bunch of bait and fish on the graph, I'll mark those as red. If I see man-made structure, I'll mark those as black waypoints. So if it's a roadbed or a foundation, stuff like that. If it's an area that I think looks okay, like a stump out in the middle of a flat, but it's not super great, I'll put that as a green. And then if it's something that I just kind of think is interesting, but it's not like really getting me excited, but I think I should at least mark it because I'll mark it as white. And so that's how I color code all of my waypoints. And so that's kind of how I do it. And I also have icons on my Humminbird Onyx where I can mark it as grass or rock or trees or stuff like that. So that's how I do my waypoint management. And then also when you save these waypoints over from Google Earth, it'll save the name rock or stump or ditch, which is really helpful. So that was one of the questions that got asked on my Patreon page. The other one was when the conditions, actually let me go back here real quick to see what that question was. It was from, so time management during the fishing day, that was Richard, and then Garrett says, at what point in tournament should you abandon your original plan if it's not producing? So kind of answered that as well. Basically, when you're thinking about your practice day, I don't go into our practice day with a very set plan. I don't go in with like, I'm going to fish this shallow stretch of bushes, and then I'm going to go fish this shallow stretch of docks, or I'm going to say, I'm going to start the morning fishing shallow grass, then I'm going to go fish ledges the rest of the day. I hardly ever do that. The only time I can ever do that and get away with it is if I'm fishing like 3 days leading up to a tournament where I know that I'm catching fish in a certain area and I have 3 days to practice. Then you can spend some time actually learning what the fish are doing, maybe spend more time actually fishing. But even in a 3-day practice day, I can kind of talk about this now. In a 3-day practice day, I spend 2 of my 3 days with the rods in my apartment or in the truck or whatever, and I don't bring a single fishing pole with me for 2 out of my 3 practice days. And instead, I just drive around the lake. And let's say, I'm not fishing this deep, clear, or the shallow lake like a Hudson Lake. Let's say I go over here to like Table Rock Lake. What would I do on Table Rock? Well, on Table Rock, what I would do is instead of just looking for, places where I can catch fish by fishing down the bank and just spending time just fishing and hoping that I stumble on some fish, what I'm going to be doing instead, second here guys, sorry. What I'm going to be doing instead is I'm going to be graphing as much as I can off the bank. Now I'm going to be graphing off the shore, and I'm going to be looking for isolated rock piles. I'm going to be looking for timber lines. I'm going to be looking for isolated trees that are sticking up down some of these flat pockets. Like let's say there's one laydown or one piece of standing timber out in front of these docks. Looking for these isolated boat ramps and stuff off the bank or road beds. You'd never see this if you were just fishing down the bank when the lake's all the way up, the lake's a little bit down. These are the type of areas where even if you could see it on the bank, if you never idled into this pocket, you'd never know. And I mean, if you're just fishing, the chances of you fishing, because you're going to want to cover all this area, the chances of you just going in this pocket and fishing are probably not super high unless you're just putting your trolling motor on 10 and just ripping down the bank. So instead, I just drive down these pockets and I say, oh, look at that road or that boat ramp right there, or road or whatever that is. I'm marking that. I'm going to come back and fish that during my tournament. And especially if you're fishing a multi-day tournament, it's good to have a lot of different spots found. And then, I'll keep graphing. I'll, pull up my Navionics. I'll, go over here to Table Rock and I'll say, okay, what am I gonna look for out here? I'm gonna go, depending on the time of year, obviously, if it's the spring, I'm gonna be idling the backs of creeks. If it's the summer, I'm gonna be idling the main lake. You have to always, pay attention to your seasonal patterns. But like coming in here, I would spend, good 20 minutes just literally graphing all of this. I would graph across these humps. I would zigzag. I'd make like giant zigzags all the way down here and just go here and just drive my boat at like 4 or 5 miles an hour and just idle this whole pocket. And I'm going to be looking for bait fish out here in the middle of this creek, a rock pile off this little point or high spot, standing timber that ends maybe on the top of this big point, a school of fish that's sitting up here on the shallower hump or off this roadbed. Whatever it is, there's a billion things you could find, but the only way you're going to find it is if you just spend 2 full 12-hour days just driving and graphing. And then on my third practice day, the day before the tournament, that's when I'll actually go out. I'll start fishing down the bank. I'll bend in all my hooks, put the shrink wrap around the hooks, stuff like that. And then I'm going to fish all of the best looking areas that I found. And I'm going to fish them and I'm going to say, okay, what are areas that I think I can get bid on? And what are areas that looked really good, but maybe are a little bit weird where I'm like, I don't know if that'll work this week. And so I'm trying to eliminate the stuff that's like off the wall or that's really random. And I'll try to, do that even during my practice days when I'm just driving around graphing. I may, sometimes bring a rod or two in the boat just to check, like if I'm running way back into the back of this creek, maybe I want to spend some time in practice fishing the very back of this creek. But that one I have to run or idle all the way back in here and practice, especially since there's like flooded timber and stuff in the backs of these pockets. So I may put like one jig and one crankbait in the back of my boat, though I don't like to do that because that just tempts me to just fish and fish and fish. So it's way better just leave your rods at home. And so what I might do is just run in the backs of these creeks and make 7 or 8 flips on some of the better stretches back in here. If I start getting bit, okay, I know this area is maybe worth checking out. If I flip all the best looking stuff back in here and get no bites, then I know, okay, I'm running out of this creek. I'm not wasting time in my tournament running back in here. I'll stay more towards the main lake where it's easy to run in and out, because it's hard to fish 60 spots in a fishing day or 40 spots or even 30 spots in a fishing day when you have to idle all the way in the backs of these creeks, then spend time fishing back here, being thorough, and then fishing all the way back out. So if you can eliminate these type of areas in practice, that can definitely help out, especially if you think they're back here. A lot of times I don't even bother with these type of areas unless the fishing's really tough, like in the summertime, because these spots just take so much time to get in and out of, and there's always fish out on the main lake. So, man, I've been talking like nonstop, guys, on this practice fishing. I didn't realize I had this much to discuss. I feel like I've only got about halfway through what I wanted to discuss also, so hopefully you all are enjoying this. I'm seeing a bunch of good comments over here, but kind of trying to figure out what you guys are saying here real quick, and then I'm going to try to jump through a few more questions. I want to get to Calvin's question too on my Patreon page, so let me get through a couple questions here. Rusty Park was asking, was recently announced no MLF competitors can attend other organizations or events, an executive decision or angler vote. Did anglers overrule? Haven't heard about that, Rusty. Actually, haven't been paying too much attention to the pro circuits recently with everything else going on, so not sure on that one. Hopefully there's a bunch of people in the comments asking about it. At Fish the Moment is Luke. You going to be at any Tuesday nighters at Maumelle once they get going? Probably will be, starting in June. I'll probably fish a couple Tuesday nighters out there and take some people's money, so hopefully that will work out pretty well. Anyways, let's see here. Let me find some comments. So I'm skipping way ahead here. Okay, I'm not seeing a ton of questions. Again, if you guys want me to answer your questions, just put at Fish the Moment and a bunch of question marks. I'm going up here. Rusty says, in your opinion, do you pay much attention to pH level? None at all. And then Michael Secrest says, question, how do you know when it's time to slow down to finesse fish versus power fish? Michael, basically when I'm knowing when to slow down to power fish or finesse fish is either if the conditions are super calm and flat and no wind, I'm probably going to go to finesse fishing a lot faster than I would if the conditions are windy and cloudy and I know the current's moving. And then the other thing is that if I fish for like 4 hours or 5 hours in a row and I'm fishing power baits and moving baits constantly, especially when there's no wind or it's light wind and bright blue skies, then I will switch up to the finesse stuff. But if I have any sort of heavy wind, any sort of cloud cover, or any sort of current running through my lake, I am sticking with my power fishing baits. I'm keeping my flipping sticks, my crankbaits, my spinner baits in my hand, and I'm fishing down the bank or fishing offshore ledges, cranking a crankbait, stuff like that. Because a lot of times these fish are active somewhere on your lake, somewhere on an offshore spot, or somewhere up near the bank. If there's cloud cover, if there's wind, if there's current, they're going to be biting. And you may just have to fish a lot of areas till you connect with a school. But a lot of times I prefer to just keep fishing more areas with my power fishing baits and fish quickly and hope I run into a group of fish that's active rather than slow down and finesse fish, because slowing down and finesse fishing, one, takes a ton of time. And unless you know you have fish in your area, it's really tough to catch them. But if you or it's tough to catch fish, a lot of fish doing it. But like, let's say if you ran in here and you had this little high spot here, and you were crushing on a crankbait 3 or 4 fish in a row, and then they stop biting, I may pick up a finesse rod, a shaky head, or a drop shot and fish in these areas and catch some fish just to put some fish in the boat. And the other thing I might slow down and finesse fish on is if I have like isolated rocks or isolated stumps, or I know for sure that the fish are there. So like, let me transition over here real quick. So like, let's say we got like right here. It's kind of hard to see, but you'll see there's like an isolated stump right there. If I know these fish are spawning and I know there may be some smallmouth or something that have pulled up on some of these isolated rocks off the bank, I may slow down and like fire a shaky head or a drop shot on those spots. But again, it's very isolated pieces of cover. It's not like I'm just going to start picking up a drop shot and just start fishing down this bank or this row of docks. I hardly ever do that because it takes way too long to catch fish. You're not covering enough water, and you're not going to collide with a school of fish. You may collide with an individual fish, but you're not going to pull up and catch 7 or 8 fish in a row doing that. At least most of the time. Okay, so that's good there. So now, uh, oh, Keith's asking, do you like the pink worm on beds? I do, Keith. I like the pink floating worms are really good bed fishing. Just because I can see them. I'm very colorblind, so any help I can get seeing the bait, especially when I'm sight fishing, is much appreciated. So last thing I want to do is switch over to my Patreon page one more time for you guys. I want to answer Calvin's question because I know probably waiting, or he'll be listening to this and he's like waiting for me to answer his question. It's the first one here, but Calvin asked, last Friday we had strong storms come through with strong winds that blew around the islands and it changed everything about the lake. How would you fish the lake? So this is a really good question, and it kind of relates to how I would practice fish on a lake when I maybe pre-fish the day before the tournament. And so that's the last thing we haven't talked about yet, is how I would pre-fish when I have a day to fish right before the tournament. 1 second here, guys. I'm pushing every wrong button. But let's say, for example, I'm out here on, I'm going to go to some lakes over in Florida because these are a lot more relevant for this type of topic. But let's say I'm going over here and I'm fishing on the Harris chain. And so on the Harris chain of lakes over here, you'll notice that there is these big open areas, and basically the wind can blow in and it can blow muddy water around the lake. It can muddy up the water. It can, blow out an area because of the mud. And the fish in Florida, pretty much year round, don't like that muddy water. It's not what they're looking for. And so if you're looking through this image, you can see like over here, 1 second, I need to find a good image of Harris chain. Give me 1 minute, guys. Did not prep this ahead of time. Probably should have. How you guys doing? Well, I'm looking for some good dirty water images. Let me know in the comments if you had a good day, if you've been catching them. I have barely been fishing, so that's really unfortunate. Hoping to get out more. Also can't find any clean water here. But anyways, okay, this will do-ish. Not really. Anyways, this is better, kind of better. So if you look over here, you can see the water here is a little bit darker, and right in here, that darker water is going to be your clear water. And then on the north side of the lake, you can see the water is a lot more green and tinted. And so what I'm thinking is that there's probably a strong south wind that was pushing on this lake, and it muddied up this whole area up here. And let's say that you were running down the bank up here and you were cracking them down this stretch of grass, maybe fishing in the spring when they're spawning, or maybe even the post spawn. You were cracking them here, but you were cracking them when you had clean water in these areas, and all that wind pushed up that dirty water. The day before your tournament, let's say you practiced on Friday and you came in and you were just crushing them down this bank, then what happens is that these fish are going to shut off on these Florida lakes. They also shut off on a lot of other types of lakes when that wind is blowing in really hard and it muddies up the water. And so what happens is that these fish on the lower end or on the south side of this lake are going to be less affected because that south wind was blowing here and this bank is protected and this water will stay clearer. And what happens a lot of times, guys, is that they'll come in a tournament, or they'll fish the day before a tournament, a Friday before a Saturday tournament, and they'll catch them like crazy in an area like this. And they're crushing them here, and they think, oh, I got the spot found. I'm going to spend all 8 hours of my day fishing down this bank. I caught 20 pounds. I'm catching 5-pounders like crazy. This is where it's at. They come back the next day after that south wind blew all night and muddied up this water, and they come back and they don't catch a single fish in this area. And they're like, man, why the fish were biting so well yesterday? Why did they all leave? Did I catch them all? Like, I just have terrible luck. Like, I didn't put the bait in front of a fish. What really happened, though, and that's not the case, what really happened is that that water muddied up and those fish just shut down. And so what you may have need to do is run down to the south side of this lake where the lake was protected, find that clear water, and try to replicate the same type of area you were fishing up here, but just find it on another part of the lake with clear water. And a lot of times you can make that adjustment and catch some good fish. And a lot of times that's why I like to focus on not fishing too much in practice, though on like a Florida lake, it's actually really good to have an area where you know the fish are, because these bass in Florida will group up a lot more. And so that's one thing I'm not talking about. I have a lot of different practice strategies that I use. And so sometimes, like on a really grassy lake, for example, I may spend a lot of time fishing as opposed to just graphing, because, like, let's say we go up to the north here and we go to some lakes up in like Wisconsin. So we go up here and we got right here. This is, I believe, we could get the places. I want to make sure I'm hitting the right place here. So this is Poygan, and this is Lake Butte, and then you have this up here, which is actually Page's Slough. And so this is the Winneconne chain of lakes, and I fished these lakes a ton when I was younger. And what happens is that you can sometimes find fish out on these lakes in these offshore grass beds. And what will happen is that you'll kind of see in here that there's these big, give me 1 second while this loads. Nope, that's not a good image. You can see there's these big grass beds, and this grass will stick out here out in the middle of the lake. And this is really good on like Lake Minnetonka, a lot of the northern lakes, and there'll be grass out here. And I actually don't know if there's grass out here. I've always fished up here. Page's Slough is always where I caught him, up in this river. This river's so good. I love this river. That's where we spent all of our tournament days. And then Lake Winnebago over here, just for guys who fish out. They know what I'm talking about. But anyways, here's a boat ramp in Winneconne. But there's, grass beds and stuff like that, and there's lily pad fields, things like that. And a lot of times what you have to do on these lakes is you have to fish a ton of lily pads or fish a ton of grass, offshore grass, and flip or throw a frog or fish it kind of quick. And what happens is that you'll find that there's going to be 3 or 4 little areas these fish will group up on. And you'll fish like 10 miles, like not joking, like if you have 3 days of practice, or if you have a day of practice, you may be able to fish a mile or a mile and a half stretch of grass. And you can look on your maps and find the better spots, the places where there's points or ditches or, deeper water cutting in. Again, watch my other videos for that. But what you have to do is just fish a ton, because these fish will group up, and it's really hard in a tournament day to find these fish, because you have to take your time fishing every single inch, because these fish will group up in like one stretch that's like this big. It's like the size of your boat. They'll set up on one little stretch right here. They won't be anywhere over here. They won't be anywhere over here or anywhere back up in here. They're just going to be on this one little stretch, maybe with deep water right here. And there may be 60 fish stacked up here. And the only way you'll know that is by fishing. And so when I'm fishing grass lakes, or where I have lily pads or offshore grass, like offshore vegetation, then I'm going to spend more time fishing. And in general, if I'm fishing a grass lake, I'm going to spend more time fishing in practice. And I'm going to, instead of graphing looking for fish, I'm going to use moving baits like a lipless crankbait or a frog or a swimming worm like a Zoom speed worm, and fish through these grass beds, just fishing for one bite. And once I get one bite in practice, I'll mark a spot there and I'll leave it. And I don't try to catch multiple fish off these areas. I just wait to catch one fish. Because what will happen is that you'll pull up on this lily pad field, and in practice you may catch 2 or 3 12-inchers, and then you'll come back the next day and the conditions change, the wind's up, whatever, cloud cover comes in, and you'll catch 3 4-pounders off this same stretch where you caught the bunch of 12-inchers the day before. So don't be afraid to come back and fish areas where you catch little ones in lily pads in the grass fields. So anyways, there's so much more to talk about with practice fishing, guys. I want to make a ton of videos about it because I have so much to share about it, and I've fished over 150 tournaments, had more than 150 practice days in my life, and so a lot of information to kind of share with you on what I've learned from that. But hopefully, this is kind of a good starter. Even though I rambled a lot and just talked about a bunch of random crap, basically. For an hour and 10 minutes, but I'm going to run through these questions really quick before I sign off here. Tim says, I'm fishing my first tournament ever this Sunday, and the water is around 60 degrees. It's a grass lake. What would you look for? 60 degrees in a grass lake, I would look for inside grass lines is what I would do. So if I'm going over to find Green Lake is a good one to look at. So Green Lake, there's going to be inside grass lines on Big Green. So if you look in here, you can see that there's some areas in here where you have grass right here, and the grass comes in, and it comes out to here, and the grass stops, and it's a little bit deeper out here, and it stops, and then up here, there's actually some sand, and the grass ends. That's your inside grass line. And these bass love to spawn on these grassy lakes, both smallmouth and largemouth, on these inside grass lines when the water is about 60 degrees and they're spawning. So I would just fish down these inside grass lines, pitching your bait on the edge of this grass with a Senko, with a jig, with a creature bait, whatever, fishing down these grass lines. And also look for dark spots out on these flats and fire a drop shot or a Senko on the dark spots, because the smallmouth and stuff and bass, largemouth will spawn on those dark spots. So that's what I would do on the grass lake in a quick answer. I know a lot about Wisconsin lakes too. You guys probably haven't heard me talk too much about them, but I did fish a lot of tournaments out here. I actually finished like second in an Angler of the Year, or not Angler of the Year, or I fished second in a tournament on Big Green Lake 1 year. I don't know why I say Angler of the Year, but finished second in Big Green Lake in a tournament when I was like 12 years old. It was a Fishers of Men adult tournament. So been fishing a lot of lakes since I was really young. I wasn't 12, I was like 10. I don't know why I said I was 12. I was like 10 years old and fished second in an adult tournament. Like had 100 boats in it. But anyways, Matt says, kayak fisherman here. I can't move around the entire lake as well as someone with a boat. How would you suggest would be a good way to find an area of the lake to fish? I do use maps. So I mean, if you're kayak fishing, I don't know if you can take out of multiple boat ramps. So, for example, what I would do if I was, let's say, Lake Dardanelle. Lake Dardanelle is a great example. Over here, let's say you can go to multiple boat ramps. You're not stuck in one boat ramp. What I would do is I would spend some time, especially if your kayak has a depth finder. I would just run to like 6 different boat ramps in a day, or maybe probably 6 boat ramps would be feasible. Go in your kayak, and I wouldn't fish. I would just paddle around this area, look at water temperatures, look at water clarities, and just look and see what you think about the area. So you have a boat ramp here in Delaware Bay. Then you have a boat ramp here by the state park, and I would just paddle around out here and see where I would go. Then I would come over here to the back of Ouida right here, the islands, and I would paddle around here and see what I thought of this. And then run back in the strip pits and stuff back in here. And then I would run all the way up the lake, and I would drop my kayak up here in Piney Bay. And so if you can move around the lake, I would do that, and I would just spend the gas driving around the lake and dropping your kayak in different areas. And then if you're forced to fish in one area of the lake, like let's say you have to launch back here in Ouida, what I would do is instead of just, trying to fish the obvious stuff, that's when I would definitely fish the most subtle stuff you can find. Basically, maybe the first hour of the day, book it over to the best bank you can find and fish the one area you want to fish. That's good advice for any tournament guy. If you're in a tournament, run to the area you think you have the best chance of catching your fish in first, because spot's probably going to get beat up by multiple guys. And if you're a late boat and you're fishing a community hole, maybe runs like your third best area, because a lot of times your first best area will have a ton of boats in there. And if you're the last boat, you may have 5 boats ahead of you running into that tournament or running into that area. And so maybe runs like your third best area or second best area if you're like the last boat in the tournament. But anyways, just look for the stuff that's really not obvious, kind of like I showed you earlier, like those isolated rocks or stumps, stuff like that. That's what I look for. And then Mongo Fishing says, are you fishing the tourney on Hamilton Saturday? I am not, unfortunately. I'm not fishing any tournaments this weekend. I probably won't be fishing any tournaments until probably June. Then I'll probably just jackpot a few around Little Rock. So, and then Anglin Adventure says, you probably don't remember me, but I used to fish the Fishers of Men. I remember you used to fish with Dave Belongia. I have some big fishing things happening. Shoot me a message, Steve Mortensen. Steve, good to hear from you, man. I did fish with Dave Belongia. That was my old fishing partner, and it's cool you remember me. I will shoot you a message here. Anglin Adventures. Actually, Steve, just shoot me a message on Instagram. That'll probably be easier. It's hard to find these comments afterwards. It's just at Fish the Moment's my Instagram handle. Just shoot me a private message there, and we can talk. And Clayton says random awesomeness. Thanks, Clayton. Appreciate that. And then Tristan's saying, how do you set hook on harness soft swim baits? I actually haven't fished any harness soft swim baits. I just ordered some, actually sitting right over there. So I'm going to do that the first time pretty soon here. I haven't really fished a lot of swim baits in the past. I've been focused on crankbaits and jigs because that's, if you watch one of my videos on like my analytics, that's what I catch 50% of my fish on. But I'm getting into swim bait fishing hopefully pretty soon. And then Ray says, greetings from Grand Lake, Oklahoma. Ray, I'm very close to you, actually. I'm actually about an hour living here in northwest Arkansas. And so I'm actually pretty close to Grand Lake, so I may see you out on the lake sometime. And then Angle Adventure says, I love the live video. Appreciate that, man. So anyways, and then Diego says he loves to fish. What is up, man? I speak a little bit of Spanish. I would say I took like 15 years of Spanish in school and have a Spanish minor, so I can speak Spanish pretty well, but I don't practice it very much anymore. But you guys might learn a little bit more about I have a lot of random talents that I haven't really shared with you guys. Maybe you'll be able to pick up on a few of them throughout the course of my videos. But anyways, that's pretty much all I have for you guys tonight. Again, kind of all over the place with it. Hopefully a lot of that made sense and you kind of pieced it all together. Videos on all this will be coming soon, and so hopefully you guys will be able to pick up on all these ideas in other videos. And other than that, hope you guys enjoyed the video. And Ernest says, how do you prepare as a co-angler? Great question. Ernest, I need to jump off here, but I will make a video on that one as well, on co-angler fishing. I did a ton of it over the years, so I need to make more videos on that. It's a good thing you reminded me about that. So I'll make a video on that actually pretty soon here, because I can still do that. I'm not going to be co-angler fishing, so I can share some videos on that pretty soon here. So great idea. And other than that, hopefully you all enjoyed the stream. Sorry. After talking for an hour and 16 minutes and 52 seconds, I am out of it. But again, thanks again for joining the stream. Thanks again for all of the support. I'm posting a lot more videos going forward here. I kind of had a break where I haven't been posting very much. So I'm going to be posting a video a week, every week, plus my live stream going forward here very consistently. Have a lot of tournament videos coming up, videos on spawn fishing, all kinds of stuff. So definitely stay tuned to the channel for more great fishing content. And other than that, hope you all have a great night, and I'll see you next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Time, as always. See y'all later.